A house can be a great investment for real estate brokers, the government, insurance companies, and banks. Basically everyone except the owner. You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. So hello to you and welcome back to another episode. So my wife and I are currently spending a couple weeks in Thailand. Right now we're in week 2 of our 2-week trip. We're back in Bangkok City after venturing around the beaches of Krabi. And we definitely had our fill of coconut shakes and those Thai banana pancakes. Oh, and by the way, since I'm recording this from an Airbnb, you might hear a bit of loud traffic noise in the background. And there's also these exotic birds making interesting sounds in the background. So I apologize in advance. Anywho, so on these next 2 episodes, I'll be giving you my key takeaways from 2 books that gave me a good foundation when it comes to FIRE strategies. Although books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Richest Man in Babylon gave me some good financial literacy knowledge, these next 2 books were all about how to accelerate our time to FI. So on this episode, I'll be giving you my 3 biggest takeaways from the book Quit Like a Millionaire with the subtitle No Gimmicks, Luck or Trust Fund Required. And it's written by Kristy, Shen and Bryce Leung in 2019. So Kristy and Bryce are leading voices in the FIRE movement and run a successful blog called Millennial Revolution. They're both retired in their early 30s as software engineers to travel the world, write and help other people on their journeys as well. What I loved about this book was that it was so fun to read, but at the same time very tactical. Like their personality really came through in their writing, and they had some really good strategies and formulas that you could all use. Okay, so let's kick things off with big lesson number 1. Okay, so big lesson number 1 is that your house is not an investment. So Robert Kiyosaki also mentioned something similar in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This also goes against the grain of our Asian culture. Now, we probably will buy a property at some point, but this lesson just woke me up a bit to home buying and the massive costs involved, especially if you live in a high cost of living area. So this was obviously relevant to the authors who at the time were living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, which was Vancouver in Canada. Anyway, this one just made me more careful when thinking about buying a house, because buying a house can be quite an emotional thing. It can be easy to get carried away, especially when you start seeing some awesome houses in nice neighborhoods with nice gardens. And then you start imagining yourself living there. And then you might have the added pressure of your family and friends telling you to buy a house. And of course, there's the time pressure, because as we all know, the longer you wait, the higher the prices get. So the author's right, but all of these lessons fly out of the window when it comes to housing. By the way, by lessons, they mean saving and fearing debt. In Chinese culture, a house is the be-all, end-all status symbol and the only thing we throw our hard-earned money at. It's also the only thing we're willing to go into debt for. End quote. So anyway, what we sometimes fail to see through those rose-tinted glasses are all the costs involved throughout the whole home ownership lifespan. So things like annual home insurance, property taxes, homeowners association fees, not to mention home maintenance and repairs, for example, a roof leak, a burst pipe, a boiler repair, or a renovation you always wanted to do. Then there's all the fees involved when buying and selling a house, like real estate agents, lawyers, and all the taxes involved. And of course, the mother of all expenses, the dreaded mortgage interest payments. Well, that's obviously if you don't buy your house straight cash though. So the authors said, a house can be a great investment for real estate brokers, the government, insurance companies, and banks. Basically everyone except the owner. This cracked me up. They also have a nice little formula to decide when buying a house is beneficial. They call it the rule of 150. And this is how it works. So what you do is you check your potential monthly mortgage payment and multiply it by 150%, which is roughly how much your house would actually cost per month, taking into account all the things I just mentioned earlier. If the result is higher than your monthly rental cost, then continue renting. If it is lower, then it's better to buy. So with the authors, their monthly rental in Vancouver for a one bed at the time was 850 Canadian dollars, and that's per month. So multiplying their potential mortgage for a house they wanted to buy by 150%, they figured it was actually much better to rent overall. So they stuck with that and didn't buy a house. Okay, let's go to big lesson number 2, which is choosing your degree carefully and the POT score, P-O-T score. But I'll explain that more shortly. So I like the title of this chapter, which is Don't Follow Your Passion Yet. In a nutshell, what I learned here was the importance of doing your due diligence when choosing what career to take, especially if you have to pay a lot for university. So it's balancing choosing a career that will give you a decent salary in the future and also one that doesn't cost too much in tuition fees. This might sound like super obvious, but sometimes we forget to do proper due diligence here. And we sometimes just go with what our passions are or what we enjoyed doing when we were younger. So when the author Kristy was considering what degree to take, she had 3 subjects she was interested in. So the first one was writing, second one was accounting, and then the third one was computer engineering. So her passion was writing, and she really wasn't so pumped about coding all the time in computer engineering. But she assessed that the potential future salary as a writer compared to the other 2 were quite low. Unless you're someone like Stephen King, she said. Again, they have a nifty little formula we can use to calculate which career would give you the best return in the future. They call it the POT score, or P-O-T score, which stands for pay over tuition. I'm telling you, this book is just full of little funny tidbits. The formula is this: average salary of the potential career above minimum wage divided by the total cost of a degree. So in their example, at the time of their writing, the minimum wage annual salary was $14,248 a year. Using the accounting career as an example, the average accountant salary was $38,200 a year. So subtracting the minimum wage salary of $14,248 gave $23,952. So dividing this number by the total degree cost gave what they call a POT score of 1.83. So the higher the POT score number, the better. Now she calculated that computer engineering gave a POT score of 2.81, which is quite good, while her childhood dream career as a creative writer came in last at 0.2. What was even more eye-opening was when they ran the POT numbers by some typical careers. So performing art careers like fine art, dancing, acting range from around 0.51 to 0.83, which is quite low. Interestingly, lawyers and doctors had fairly low POT scores as well, of 1.09 and 0.78 respectively, mainly because of the length of time to graduate and the crazy tuition fees per year. So the mind-blowing thing was that construction trades had an awesome POT score. So like plumbers, their POT score was a whopping 5.14, mainly because of their relatively low tuition fee combined with decent future salaries. The moral of the story is to choose a career that you don't mind doing but also gives you the best return. You can do your passion on the side or focus more on it once you've got your finances in order. So basically, follow the math or the best return first, then follow your passion, is what the author is trying to say. It's actually what they done themselves. They became software engineers first, built up their financial house, then was able to write a book about it once they didn't have the financial pressures. Alright, so on to the last lesson and the biggest lesson for me. Okay, so big lesson number 3 is you don't need $1 million to be financially independent. So when I first started my FI journey, I thought I needed millions of pounds and like these massive numbers that you see in the news and in blog articles. But when I ran the numbers in more detail, I realized actually you don't need to be a millionaire. It mainly depends on your expected expenses after retirement. So obviously, if you have a lavish lifestyle, of course, you'll need a sizable retirement pot to match it. So what I learned from the book was there are different methods to get to your FIRE number. Basically, it's all the stuff that we talk about on this podcast. And so it doesn't have to be the traditional way of just straight saving and investing until you reach full FI. It doesn't have to be a linear line. So the authors suggested the following 3 strategies. The first one was side FIRE, second one was partial FIRE, and then the third one was geo arbitrage, which we talk about a lot on this podcast. So the first 2 essentially come under the semi-retirement umbrella, where you supplement the passive income from your FI portfolio with active work. So side FIRE is essentially having a side hustle in retirement. Let's just say, for example, someone's expenses in retirement was 40k USD a month. So if their FI portfolio was paying them 20k a month, then what they'll do is have a side hustle to cover the remaining half of that, so another 20k. So in theory, this means your overall FI portfolio amount can be cut in half. So partial FI is similar in the sense that you're still working, but imagine if it's a job you enjoy, you can just reduce your hours in retirement to part-time hours to cover the remaining half of your expenses. So again, your FI number can be reduced. Now, if you're not into active work in retirement, another option is to drastically reduce your expenses while in retirement. So this is where geo arbitrage comes into play. So we mentioned it before in episode 12, all about geo arbitrage if you want to have a listen. So essentially, if you retire in another country with a really low cost of living, so for example in Southeast Asia, and your FI portfolio is giving you a passive income in US dollars, you can massively reduce your expenses in retirement. Again, meaning a much lowered portfolio amount or FI stash. What these strategies are doing is lowering the amount your portfolio size needs to be. It doesn't have to be a linear journey of having to amass, say, $1 million. There are other strategies to make it work, or what I like to call FI workarounds. Although it would be good to be full FI, we're not all in privileged positions or have massive salaries to shorten our time frame to FI. And actually, this is the essence of this podcast, finding ways to get freedom before reaching full FI and also trying to do it on more of a modest income. So anyway, that was the biggest lesson of the 3 for me. Alright, let's do a quick recap of the 3 biggest lessons from the book Quit Like a Millionaire. So the first one was your house is not an investment. The second one was choose your degree carefully and also look at the POT score or P.O.T. score. The third one was you don't need $1 million to be financially independent. There are other ways to skin the cat, as they say. So I do have some other lessons that I scribbled in the book, but there might be too many to mention here. Anyway, stay tuned next week where I'll be covering my absolute favourite FI book ever, called The Simple Path to Wealth. Catch you then. If you think this episode would help a friend, please don't hesitate to share it with them. The show notes can be found at freedombeforefi.substack.com. If you have a question or want to connect, feel free to send me an email at freedombeforefi@proton.me. That's freedombeforefi@proton.me. If you found this show useful and want to be notified of future episodes, you can follow us on Spotify or Apple via the show's main page or on whatever app you're using right now. And lastly, if you've just learned one good thing that will help you in your journey and you want to help us out here, please do leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player app. If you're using Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a nice review by scrolling to the bottom of the podcast page. That would help us out loads. And as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.